Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is May 20th, 3 o'clock. It's that time. How are you doing, Piper Vogel and Mom with Bulldogs? I'm glad you were able to find the feed. Hopefully other people will be able to catch the show because it's going to be a good one once it's posted on YouTube. And as some of you know, I got another strike, so I'm going to be out from that channel for the next 2 weeks, but I have this backup channel that will serve its purpose. I'm going to be able to document my ongoing research and share it directly with you. None of this has ever been shared with anybody. It's all in my notebooks and in my some talks, but most in a really organized fashion, semi-organized fashion. This is it. This is the preview right here. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today's talk is Suicides, the Most Foul. And for those of you who are at least partly acquainted with Shakespeare, you know that that's an allusion to Hamlet, where the immortal phrase, murder most foul, is uttered. So this is a takeoff on that. And I'm going to be dealing with two suicides. You're getting a twofer right here. This is two for Thursday. Two for the price of one. You're going to hear about the suicide involving the artist Mark Lombardi, and you're going to learn a little bit about the suicide. And I put, air quotes on that, of course, James Hatfield, not James Hetfield. That's the lead singer of Metallica, one of the greatest rock singers, probably, I'd say, of all time, not just in our time, but of all time. This is the author, James Hatfield, not Hetfield, Hatfield. And I mentioned that because I had a hard time finding information on him. Searchable information, because I was looking under James H. Hatfield, and he goes under his author's name, his publisher's name. Anyway, I can get into that a bit later. So today's, ladies and gentlemen, in celebration of this channel of mine, the Professor Hamamoto channel, being banned for 2 weeks, and this is after I did the live stream with my friend and my colleague, Lena Poo, we're going to be doing this twofer. However, if you are a Patreon subscriber, you're going to get first listen to this 40-minute audio that we did. I stripped the video part and I was able to post it on the Patreon, and it's there. You can listen to it, and I have to figure out a way how to put it on some other platform so that everybody can listen to it. It's an important talk, not just it as an update, but Lena Poo provides some concrete strategies and tactics that she herself and her network of people, which is international in scope, as you will learn from listening to the exchange, the conversation we had yesterday. But she'll give you some concrete information on how to go about pushing back against the tyranny that's being imposed on us. And I also shared on the Patreon an excerpt from the very new book by Dr. Joseph Mercola, the great Dr. Mercola. Where would we be without him? He's been hard at work on our behalf. That is the behalf of humanity, as opposed to big pharma, like our supposed elected representatives. They're mostly in the pocket of big pharma and all the other large corporate lobbies. But Dr. Mercola has been an advocate. Most of you already know this, but I want to praise him even more so, because I'm so grateful that people like him are so dedicated to the cause of human freedom and the preservation of our health. So I sent along a little bit of a cover art for you and the foreword, so that you can go and buy the book for yourself. I hear it's on serious back order. There's so many, and this is a really good sign. And I'm really excited about this. I can see this I won't call it pushback, because we're already here. We're already pushing away. But I see this aggression becoming more and more manifest every single day. And this book and the fact that it's so far back ordered is another signal that, hey, everybody, before it was just you, right, who are listening here, and myself, have been following this for the last year and a half and really aggressively pursuing all the information we can, but larger numbers. And this is what we wanted to see. And it's starting to happen. And I also want to tip my hat, not just to Dr. Mercola, but to Mr. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who wrote the foreword. Robert Kennedy Jr., as you know, is an advocate of citizen health, children in particular, but also for adults. I gave a little short talk on his aunt, Rosemary Kennedy, and the Kennedy family has a long history of public advocacy for people with handicaps, and it was his family, the Kennedy family, John F. Kennedy, where the Americans with Disabilities Act was pushed through, so people with mental or physical handicaps would be able to participate more fully in civil society, as they should be. They're human beings. We're human beings. We're all human beings. We all have our skills and our energies and our intelligence and our creativity to share. And we're going to keep up that effort, despite the fact that we have all these forces pushing in the other direction, right? As they say, life is short, and there's all kinds of these entities out there who are trying to make it a lot more short than it already is. And we're not going to let that happen, are we? So thank you very much, Dr. Mercola. Thank you very much, Robert F. Kennedy, for writing that wonderful foreword to this valuable book. And I've read the first 2 chapters. It's incredible. I mean, I'm just amazed that they were able to compile all this information. I mean, it's out there, but they were able to compile it, synthesize it, and make it readily understandable to the layperson like you and me. I mean, you might be an expert, but I'm certainly not. And there's a large, extensive bibliography. All the citations are there, right? So you're not going to say this is, not you, but I mean the censors, the fact checkers, the curators, the arbiters of reality, right? Those people are not going to be able to say that this was just a slapdash attempt to put a bunch of garbage out there. Far from it. You're the ones that are putting the garbage out there, and we're not having it anymore. So it's fully documented, and it's also useful so that we can go to the original sources and look at the data, look at the information, look at the articles, follow their arguments, and then come up with our own insights, which are important, because by far the story's not over yet. Few stories are ever over. We're finding out decades later that the history and the accounts that we've been told are much more complex and nuanced that we could have ever imagined. And to me, that's exciting. Uncovering these bits of information, like we're going to be doing today shortly. But before I do begin, I would like to thank Peter Duke, the great Peter Duke, the great Tracy Connors, for inviting me on their show yesterday. It's called, for those of you who don't already know, The Reality Operating System. Great name for a show. The Reality Operating System, as opposed to those other ones that we were alluding to just a few moments ago. The Reality Operating System. Peter Duke and Tracy Connors as co-hosts. They invited me on yesterday, and the title of the episode is From Kinetic to Genetic Warfare, in parentheses. And this alludes to a talk that I gave with my publisher, the great Chris Milligan, the previous week. This is where we talked about, publishing the state of the world and where it's going. And this is where I really kind of outlined the concept to Chris Milligan that we, while being cognizant of history in the past, we have to stop fighting the previous wars. We're not talking about boom boom so much anymore, not even a nuclear war, which is kinetic. We're talking about a new form, an expansion of the traditional forms called genetic warfare. And Peter thought that was a real memeable phrase, kinetic to genetic. So we went with that. And it's just not a matter of memeing, ladies and gentlemen. You got guys like these posers like Ali Alexander. I mean, he's probably changed his name again for all I know. He's supposed to be, the meme master. I'm interested in the substance of these memes, right? And the substance is that we are in a new type of warfare, and as such, we have to defend ourselves and go on the offensive in a way that is in accord with the new way of executing harm, visiting harm upon humanity. So having the proper conceptual understanding is crucial in forming a defense or an offense, in forming a strategy, let's say. And as long as committed individuals, and I was thinking about this earlier today or last night, as long as committed individuals like Peter Duke and Tracy Connors, so long as people like this continue to produce shows such as the Reality Operating System, we can prevail over any form of political and cultural tyranny. Remember, it's not just political. There's a lot of softening up that needs to be done in the cultural realm, as we're finding out, right? Before they can take us over politically, they have to erode our moral fiber, our ethics, our values, as well as our bodies and minds, to soften us up for the takeover. But we can resist that if we have shows like the Reality Operating System. And I like to think, ladies and gentlemen, that I'm also contributing to this process. I'm going to do my darndest to keep pushing in that direction and pushing even harder. I'm even going to be expanding my realm of activity in a conversational thread with Tracy Connors, she had some great observations about this true crime podcast. True crime, not crime fiction like Miss Marple and the whodunits, right? They're kind of interesting. I could never really get into that, that much myself. I like detective fiction, but the whodunit, Agatha Christie, yeah, it's kind of. I like to listen to it. I don't really like get excited about reading. I want to read about crimes, and that's called true crime. That's the genre. And she had mentioned earlier, I'm going to get into this talk soon, but I have to give you a preview of where I'm going myself professionally. Tracy had mentioned that half of the top 10 half of the top 10 podcasts on iTunes are of the true crime genre. It's hugely popular. And she's right about that. It's not just in the case of iTunes, but also in publishing. Publishers love true crime. Those books sell like hotcakes, including the series by George Hodel, who I'm going to get into in a moment, just very briefly. But she also, and this is where the female intelligence is so important, because it's counterintuitive to me, right? It slipped my awareness, but now that I know this very important piece of sociological demographic information, I'll be able to put it to good use, because Tracy said that women are heavily into true crime. And I thought it was a guy thing. I thought it was a dude type of occupation. I mean, there's murder, mayhem, just blood and guts all over the place. I think, gosh, most men would have a difficult time reading this, and or just people in general, but the public just and I'm still trying to figure out the psychology. What is it? I mean, don't we have enough of this? We have to read about it too. Yeah, but so far as women are concerned, that whole gender angle, I'm still trying to figure it out. But I'll just throw something out here. It might be just really misplaced, but I thought about it today when I was washing the dishes. Crime and criminality is one of the few areas in the society and the culture where the gender roles are strictly defined. Right. This is the one area where it's uncontested that men are the violent and the really, really horrendous species. Not species, but gender of the human species. But in reading these, and I've read tons of them, and reading enough of these true crime books, you come to realize that there's a whole, I won't call them a population, but there's a very sociological significant segment of the female population who love serial killers. When I say love, I mean literally love. They write the MASH letters. There are any number of marriages that have resulted because of these fixations, if you want to call them that. And I've read some of the literature on that. None of these articles from psychologists are that convincing. I think there's something much deeper at play there, but we're going to think about it. Anyway, what it amounts to is that there is a niche for me in true crime on iTunes, because YouTube is it's a very effective medium, but it's much too small for me. I need to have audiences of 500,000, 750,000 routinely for my casts, my presentations, because they're highly original and they're of caliber and a quality that stand equal or above to anything else that's out there on Sirius, Westwood One, or any level in the English language, on any level, broadcasting, podcasting, or vidcasting that are out there. I see a lot of retread comedians who are out there or who have now remade themselves into vidcasters and vlogcasters. And you may be good at in comedy, and I tip my hat to you. As you know, I respect comedians, Joan Rivers, Robin Williams, George Carlin. I've given talks on them, right? And while I appreciate that, it's a far removed from people who are doing original research and are able to synthesize complex anthropological, sociological, historical data, information, and combine it with a very strong, intuitive, empathic sense that I have and bring it at a very, very high level. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's why I wanted to mention this before I go on. You're going to be treated to an incredible series of iTunes type podcasts. Well, not iTunes type, but iTunes podcasts. They're going to be shown on iTunes or distributed on iTunes, which is the number one platform for that. That's why I'm going with them. But here's the angle, and perhaps you'll have some ideas or some suggestions that I might be able to benefit by. But my angle on this true crime podcast that'll be on iTunes, and that'll get me up to the 500,000, 750,000 level where I belong. It's going to be true crime that's going to focus on the university and the college, mostly in the U.S., in America, but to a certain extent maybe Britain, right? English-speaking countries, but mostly in America, because there seems to be a certain pattern of criminality that I've been able to suss out through my extensive reading, research, and my own personal experiences, my own observations. So my true crime podcast, and I also have a professional stake and 30, close to 40 years of professional experience in this world. So in other words, I'm an insider. I'm looking at it from the inside out, outside in. Whereas someone who wants to steal this idea, listening to me, you're going to be an outsider, most likely. And you're not going to be able to even scratch the surface. So in comparison to me, I mean, I'm that sure and confident of the scope and the depth with which I will apply myself in these casts. So that's a preview. It's going to be, well, I'm not going to give you the title. In fact, I'm still trying to refine it and get it down really tight. But it's going to have that focus of dealing with true crime on campuses. And just when I was preparing for this talk, I happened to be browsing through one of my favorite authors, Steve Hodel. I read him years ago when he had that very first book on the Dahlia, and now he has a whole series. It finally clicked for him that the story that he was pursuing had a wider ramifications. And in this particular volume, Most Evil, I think this is volume 4 or 5, there's a story about Cherie Jo Bates. And he's arguing that she possibly was one of the victims of the Black Dahlia killer, who also but was his father, which puts a really bizarre and strange twist in the whole story. And this woman in all respects. I don't mean to trivialize her death and her murder, and to disrespect her family. But Cherie Jo Bates was happened to be a student at Riverside City College. She was 18 years old, and she was slain on campus. And this is more common than you might imagine, and that's part of the unique approach that I'm going to be taking, is that I'm going to be looking at the university as its own city, its own community. In fact, its own kind of sovereign state in a way. It's kind of like Washington, D.C. It's kind of like one of these autonomous zones that we've been hearing about. In fact, in the University of California, it's enshrined in that fashion in the state constitution. It's like a sovereign entity. And when you have situations like that, like the Vatican or Washington, D.C., or Tokyo or Distrito Federal, when you have these little separate entities like that, or let's say Native American reservations, you have a recipe, you have a situation, a political, economic, organizational situation where crimes of the most heinous sort can be executed, committed, and the perpetrators can get away with it, right? Because of certain quirks in our administrative law, which goes back to an admiralty law. So anyway, it goes on and on. I won't belabor the point right now. I'm still working out the premises and the concept, but you who are watching the live stream are getting a preview of coming attractions. So in a similar fashion that we have Tracy Connors and Peter Duke and my colleagues in the Neighborhood News Group doing this sort of cutting edge, path breaking work, we have people like artists, right, and journalists who are helping us prevail over the most desperate circumstances. And again, like in the case of Dr. Mercola, I feel a great deal of optimism that we have people like Mark Lombardi, an artist who sacrificed his life in order to reveal the lineaments, the structure, the skeletal, the muscle, and the bone, and the blood, lifeblood of what today is called the deep state, right? I don't use that term. That's from the Canadian scholar, Peter Dale Scott. I don't know if he's a U.S. citizen. It's about time, Professor Scott, or maybe, you've done great work, but let's hear about Canada too. Let's hear about Let's hear about crime and atrocities committed by the British Empire. And I assume you're a British subject. So in all fairness, let's hear from the mother country of all these situations. That's just my mild critique of Peter Dale Scott, who does great work. And he was an ambassador. He's a part of the diplomatic corps. So I think he'd be in a really good position to tell us what the Commonwealth of Canada is really about. And I mention this because I'm reading some horrific literature about what was going on in some of the nunneries in the 19th century through the eyes of this one person. And again, I mention that because there's all number of Canadian subjects who tell us here, and they can pass, quote unquote, as Americans. But they like to tell us how to demoralize us, mostly how awful America is and we're the source of the world's ills. So I'm just I want to recognize, just like Alex Jones keeps talking about the Chathams, right? Anybody who's racially identifiable, like Asians or Latinos or something, he's on it, right? And he keeps talking about race baiting. He's the chief race baiter of all. So that's why I go out of my way to talk about his people, right? The British, the Welsh, the Canadian subjects who somehow seem to get a pass when we're talking about these bioweapons. He's kind of edging in towards it now, but up until recently it was the Chathams. So Mark Lombardi, right? Who was he? He was, I guess you could refer to him as a conceptual artist, right? He's a conceptual artist who, let's see, he started out in really sort of middle class surroundings. Grew up like he's about my age, a couple years older. Just suburban kid, just an ordinary kid. And I can just, and this is in his biography, by the way. We'll touch upon it. But I imagine he probably had a childhood very similar to my own, watching the same garbage television shows, getting excited about the Beatles coming on, Ed Sullivan, and listening to the Strawberry Alarm Clock and bubblegum music, but also the real stuff like Chicago Blues and getting into movies. He went to college around the same time. And what he did, and he probably went through a similar process as myself. I think in previous talks I've spoken of going to Tower Record Books. They had a bookstore founded by Russ Solomon, right? The Tower Records. And I went to the original one over on Broadway Street or Boulevard here in Sacramento, California. And they had a whole section of these types of conspiracy books. And man, I ate it up. I don't know who was managing that section, but whoever he or she was, thank you very much. You helped educate me, because those books were not stocked at Borders or wherever else. And they definitely were not stocked in the university bookstore. I could only find them at Tower, and there was no Amazon back then. So I see Mark Lombardi, like myself, happening upon this whole body of alternative, let's call it research, nonfiction or true crime, that talked about what we know today as the deep state. It was these people on the margins, right? And I alluded to my publisher, Chris Milligan, at the top of this talk. He was one of the people that was early on. He wasn't as early as Adventures Unlimited or some of the other well-known publishers. A lot of it was self-published as well. But he was up there, and I think he's probably one of the top today. There's one, I can't remember what they're called. They're up in Seattle, Oregon. Some of these publishers get bought out, and then their editorial policy changes. I came across one recently. Maybe it's good. I can't remember it because I don't want to get it wrong. But anyway, so we came across this literature, and this is where you probably know who William Cooper is. This is where you find books like Behold a Pale Horse, and you're finding books like by Anthony Sutton. And you find a lot of books, as it turns out, were originally published by the John Birch Society in the 1950s. Some of it comes from people who have been involved with the Freemasons or other secret societies. And a lot of occult information. So Mark Lombardi, like myself, and people of our generation, were kind of open to it because it was a countercultural receptivity to weirdness and strangeness. And this is why I reject what I call the McGowan psyop, where, hey, we were all products of some sort of a CIA mind screw, with LSD and all that, and therefore everything that came out of there is invalidated. To me, that's a psyop, probably written for him by these people who were handing the files on Neil Young and David Crosby and Frank Zappa, the people of Laurel Canyon, right? But no, out of that milieu came a receptivity to weirdness and strange literature, and also probing deeply into the nature of our political economic system and our insight, our probing into what I call the ceremonial government. That was we were primed for that. So if the CIA was behind that and they were trying to throw us off the track, it failed. What it did was quite the opposite. It sensitized us to new ways of looking at old questions of power. And as such, we were no longer listening so closely to our professors of political science and of history. The cooler ones, yeah. I mean, the ones who were reading this literature, and some of them were, by the way, those are the ones I took all their classes, right? The ones who were doing kind of the weird, unconventional work. But the ones who had, gone to grad school in, the early 50s or something, and were just doing mainstream, not very interesting to me. So Lombardi was doing this work, and he was following the trajectory of the studio artist, the gallery artist of his time. as he was taught in school, most likely. But then at some point, and this is in the book, it's called, what's it called? Interlock? Let me see here. I'll give you the exact title. I don't have it. I'll show you a clip. I have some clips here if I can get to them right time. But he, at a certain point, said, hey, I'm going to start putting to use in my art what I have learned on the side, not at school, not in university, but reading independently. These strange question mark books. And he said, I'm also, this requires a new approach. Just like my work here requires me to go be outside the university, to go ironically on YouTube and to speak directly to you. If I did this in the classroom, I'd be reported on, and I would be investigated, and I'd be pushed out of the university. In fact, that's exactly what happened to me. So someone like Mark Lombardi is a person who I understand fully. So he said, I'm going to have to find a new medium, a new way of doing it. And this was his revolution, Mark Lombardi. He used a very old concept of social networks, and he mapped all these different relationships of the deep state together, all the names together. He linked them up, and he graphed them out. And not only that, he put this material in a gallery setting, right, for sale. Right? It's just like it's a painting, and that in itself is not revolutionary. You knew that in the 20s and 30s, the surrealists and the Dadaists and all that, they were saying, hey, what's this gallery stuff? We're gonna just destroy the French Academy. We're gonna put a urinal, invert it, and sign it en masse and put it on display and say, this is art. This is a male urinal. Let's redefine what art is. So, Lombardi had studied his art history, as all artists and creative people have to know their background before they can push it forward. So he understood that, and I don't know if he was aspiring to it, but I'm sure he was poor as a church mouse for most of his career, until he started to get attention by gallery people because of his unique approach and the fact that all these names that had only been whispered in the corridors were now in black and white on display. And let's see here. Oh, the name of the book, by the way, it's Patricia Goldstone. It's called Interlock. Mark Lombardi, born 1951, died year 2000. He's been dead 21 years by now. And he's only recently in the larger public consciousness becoming well known. There's been a documentary. It's called Kunst und Conspiracy, something like that. Art and Conspiracy. It's a German language documentary. So he is well regarded and taken very seriously by people in the arts community. Not just in the conspiracy community, but people in the high arts community. I haven't seen that doc. I've seen excerpts of it, and it's on YouTube, I believe, and there's subtitles, but I haven't seen the whole thing. I have to find that documentary. It's first, in researching this talk, it's the first time I heard about it. So, of course, I'll have to look at it now. How did I find out? This is interesting, because I told you I come out of this milieu that Mark Lombardi arises from. I first heard about him at UC Davis in my department, where I had done a lot of already. I've been doing innovative work in popular culture, is one of my specialties. Second one is sexuality, and the third one is New World Order theory. That's what I'm doing now. So that's the hat trick, right? Typically, if you're any good at all, you'll have one area that you'll be considered to be, one of the top people, if not the top person. I have three areas, and I'm stand alone in the third, the New World Order theory. I'm still the one and only practitioner of that, in or outside of academia, that I know of. So I was giving a talk there I was invited to give a faculty seminar about my current research. So I started, and they knew me from my popular culture work. They knew me from my sexuality. So it's going to be the same old, same old. But I said, no, I'm in this new area. It's continuous. It's an extension of what I've been doing. And so they were just like blown away. Says, wow, this sounds like Alex Jones. This was when Alex Jones, before he was not such a big China hater and race baiter, he was, and he didn't have all those like Owen Shrieker, the guy that's always that loudmouth braying jackass, that guy there, and he wasn't flogging all those supplements and all that. But in the old days, the early Alex Jones, they said, wow, you sound like Alex Jones, and I said, well, yeah, I'm looking at everything, even him, but I'm reading the work too. I'm reading all the different, even John Birch literature. So they were kind of taken aback by it. And even more importantly for me, because this is really what pushed me out, is that they felt resentful that they had been doing all this mainstream work. And here I am coming with a whole new approach, a radically new way of looking at American history, society, culture, and political science, and global society, right? Because they had gone through the graduate school, the very conventional way of understanding the world. And not only that, but 15 minutes into my talk, one of my junior colleagues jumped up out of her chair, and oh my God, I guess I went too far. She's just storming out in a huff, but she left her material behind, so I thought that was a good sign. And she came back 5 minutes later into the seminar room while I was rattling on about all my exciting discoveries about the New World Order, right? And so she has this mailing tube, and she pulls out this poster, and she unfurls it, and it's a Mark Lombardi poster with all these different social networks, this web of all the different people linked together, including the Bush family right in the middle of it. Yes, that's right. George Herbert Walker Bush, the Walker Bush clan, but all the other subsidiary ones. He had done his homework. He had read all the books, and he'd graphed it out, and he was now presenting it as fine art. So she was excited because that was her bit. She's into, supposedly, I don't know. I'm not fond of this person. I'm not going to mention her name. She's a typical CS, that stands for chicken, what type, academic type, who kind of weaseled her way in. But in this case, she was so taken by my research that she ran to her office and pulled us out. And I think later on, the senior professors told her, stay away from Hamamoto. He's a bad influence. Don't ever go in that direction. I don't care. I think she was reprimanded because after that, which I could care less, she made sure that she maintained a proper distance away from me. So I'm sure she's doing quite well, doing tons of mediocre work, and she'll retire with a nice fat pension. But she will have contributed, like the rest of them, zero to the knowledge bank here. So anyway, that's how I have to thank her for introducing me to Mark Leonard. She says, yeah, this is what Mark Lombardi's doing. I said, oh, great, I'm gonna check him out. And I found the book, Interlock, and I found some articles about him as a fine artist. So let's enough about me. Let's look at this one clip about that deals with the Mark Lombardi story here.
He drew the world. He did a portrait of the world. It doesn't look like the world, but he drew a portrait, a landscape of the world as it operates, the world we're living in now, and the world that's yet to come. We're in Mark's future. We are. And his future is fucked up.
weeks after September 11th, an FBI agent called the Whitney Museum of American Art and asked to see a drawing that was on exhibit there. The piece was by Mark Lombardi, an artist who died by his own hand several years ago. Using pencil, Lombardi had created an intricate pattern of curves and arcs to illustrate the links between global finance and international terrorism.
It's all public information. I am just reprocessing it. I am rearranging it in a visual format that's meaningful to me. That's basically what I'm doing. This is one way in which I can map the kind of the political and the social terrain in which I live.
Yes, it's called Kunst und Kunstbildeten, right? Let me shut that off there. Yeah, that's this German documentary that I mentioned that I have to get a hold of. That's what artists do. This is what intellectuals do. This is what musicians do. And the real good journalists, people like the level of a George Webb, they're at the cutting edge. And people are doing shows like Tracy and Peter. They're at the cutting edge. These are the people that get me, and Dr. Mercola and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. These are individuals that give me so much hope that we'll be able to escape this latest attack on humanity. And he was way ahead of the curve, Mark Lombardi, and he deserves all the credit, the recognition, and more that he is receiving posthumously. Too bad that documentary narrator said he died at his own hand. Well, you and I know, right? We've already watched the Bourdain bit that I did. We've already talked about Robin Williams, and these people are just their murders are typically covered up by quote unquote suicide. But I'm not going to say, I'm not a coroner, but you draw your own conclusions. So I'm going to let you have the luxury and the fun of investigating Mark Lombardi yourself. He's well worth it, and he's going to be an entire chapter in my book on New World Order theory because of the importance of the intuitive, the empathic, the creative minds who are always ahead of the pack in doing this type of work, which is helping our society, our culture, not just survive but to prevail into the future. And I'm running out of time, so let me move right into JH Hatfield. If you look in the search engines under JH Hatfield, you'll find a lot of references. If you look under James H. Hatfield, you'll find very little. So JH Hatfield, for those of you who want to check into it further, is the way to go. Now, how did I find out about J.H. Hatfield? I watched a documentary. It's titled Horns and Halos. It was released in 2004. And I have a DVD copy somewhere. I then misplaced it, and I just had to reorder it. I hate to do that when I already have something, but I have to view it again because I'm writing about this right now. I can't be going through my DVD collection. And by the way, if you want to score one, they're available on Amazon and they're relatively cheap. I'd buy one if I were you before they disappeared, right? So I saw this interview by Amy Goodman. She's on Democracy Now, and I know people who are consider themselves conservative. Oh, well, she's a leftist, and Democracy Now, I can't watch. Well, I don't care about your categories. I get my information from whoever and whatever and under whatever circumstance. So they had an interview with the directors, and they were good. And so I said, I got to check this. I got to find out who this guy is, And from there, I found out about this guy named J.H. Hatfield, James Hatfield. And through this documentary, I found out about this book that was published on George W. Bush. That's George Jr., right? He's the WHW senior. And the book is titled Fortunate Son, published in 1999. The story about Fortunate Son is that Hatfield had been a struggling author, and he'd been engaged in a couple of other types of activities, which I'll get to in a moment. But the upshot was one of the major trade publishers in the U.S., St. Martin's Press, gave him a contract. And they thought this book was going to be such a sensation. They had a first printing of, I don't know, tens of thousands of copies. I think there's something like 70,000. That's a lot. That's going up towards bestseller land so far as the New York Times is concerned, right? So they were committed to it. And then, however, the WAPO, the Washington Post or the Washington Compost, published an expose on it, and they accused, this is in 1999, they accused James Hatfield of all kinds of crimes, and turns out that their reportage was accurate in that Hatfield was a convicted felon. He had 10 years prior to Fortunate Son appearing, he had threatened to kill his boss or ex-boss with a car bomb, something like that story, right? This is a decade before. And he had been involved in some other minor types of activity, but, threatening death and harm to someone is a serious crime. Don't get me wrong. But they decided, the press, the WAPO, and WAPO, Washington Post is the propaganda arm of the Central Intelligence Agencies, most of you know. So they decided to pull the plug on the book and the author, because the Bush family is one of their own. It's like, gosh, it's going to be having one of our guys in the presidency, and we can't have that. So they pulled all these books, and I have them. And here's another tip: not only I'm not telling you what you do, but I would, if I were you, get a copy of the DVD Horns and Halos, cheap. I think it was like, I paid $2 or $3 for a used copy. The postage was more, but get all the copies, all 3 versions of Fortunate Son that are available on Amazon. I have all 3 of them, not because of collectibles, because I just wanted to see if there were any differences in the versions. The first one, and I'll show you in a moment, that was published by St. Martin's, most of those were recovered and they were pulped. They grind them up and they turn them back into paper mash. And then I guess they reprint Harry Potter on it after they do that. So that's what I'm referring to. And there was a second version that came out, but the version I was interested is the one that was published by a person by the name of Sander Hicks. And he's an interesting character in his own right. In researching this talk today, I found out that Sander Hicks is very much involved in electoral politics. He ran for Congress in one of the districts in the state of New York. I don't know if he won or not. I don't have any more recent information, more recent than 2 or 3 years ago. But here is the upshot of the James Hatfield story. Shortly after he was exposed as having this nasty criminal background, and he was humiliated by having his books all recalled, and his whole reputation was went into the crapper. I don't know if he had to return any of the advance money, but he probably thought that his career finally was going to reach a certain level of respectability, and he might even be able to make a living as a writer. And all of a sudden it was pulled away from him. And I think that's part of the intention of it. So what happens shortly after that? Well, on July 18, 2001, I'm reading here from an announcement, Hatfield's body was found by a hotel housekeeper in room 312 at a Days Inn in Springdale, Arkansas, in an apparent suicide by prescription drug overdose. According to the police, notes were left listing alcohol, financial problems, and Fortunate Son as reasons for killing himself. Again, one of these authors that we've been speaking about recently, including Joan Rivers and Anthony Bourdain. And this is not intentional on my part. I'm just, what are the odds of these authors dying like this? Well, they offended and insulted and people in power. And I guess who Hatfield insulted. In fact, his book was threatening to derail the Bush election. And this is the 2000 election where you had Al Gore and George W. Bush running against each other, right? Two very elite, privileged individuals. Either way, you know, we would have been screwed. But George W. Bush thought it was his turn, right? So let's take a look at the books here, just to give you an idea. Here's the original. Here's the second version of it, less flattering. It makes Bush, W. Bush, look very weak, right? And here is the book by the individual I alluded to. His name is Sander Hicks, right? And that's the documentary, Horns and Halos. Let's see. Yeah. Sorry, I'm unable to negotiate this properly here. I got it out of sequence. This is Sander Hicks. And I mentioned Sander Hicks because after Hatfield was humiliated by St. Martin's Press, Sander Hicks, who later ran for Congress, stepped up and offered to publish this book, Fortunate Son, under his label. It's called Soft Skull. Now, don't get as confused because there's still a Soft Skull around. I think it's been bought out by some other entity who I wanted to speculate about, but it has nothing to do with Sander Hicks that I know about. And this is one of Sander Hicks' books himself. This is my collection. This is about 9/11. You can see, so I don't know if I can hardly see it in my little board here, but maybe you can see it. But there are all these different figures that you will recognize, including Mohammed Atta, and I think, well, some other, I'm not going to guess because you can't really make it up, but it's about 9/11. The big wedding that's being referenced was a code word that was picked up on traffic saying, oh, the big wedding's going to happen on 9/11. So we use it as title. And this is mostly a book about his personal, it's not a research book. It's a mostly personal account by Sander Hicks about how he became of age politically, the real politics, the deep politics. And towards the end of the book, he also talks about his involvement with James Hatfield and the incredible beyond disappointment that he felt, not just for himself, but for Hatfield, and the guilt, possibly the possible guilt that he might feel for having been in some way connected with his demise, inadvertently, of course. Because let's say the book never was published, then whoever killed him could have been satisfied with that. But the fact is, this book was still in circulation, and I have a copy of it, by the way. I have the 3 versions that I know of, and to this day, maybe James Hatfield, he might still be unpublished, but he would be alive. Okay, so I skipped this one book that I think is important to look at. It's by Patricia Goldstone, and there's some pictures of our friend Mark Lombardi here. Interlock. This is when he was 7 years old. And his business card, I don't know if you can read this, death defying in the act and the art of conspiracy. I think it was still kind of fun for him at the time. Just like when you probably first, and myself, we started reading it. Oh, this is great stuff, man. This is so exciting, reading about the CIA and all the heroin trafficking and all that. So, but it doesn't really have the degree of gravitas it does until you realize, oh, this is really how the whole system operates. So he's having fun at this part still, at this time of his career. This is him in college, and like I say, we were in college around the same time. This is in 1998 when he first started to get notoriety as a serious artist, and I think this is a gallery showing. And these are some of the people that I'm going to go through that you will recognize because you're into this literature, those of you who are watching right now. You know this is Ted Shackley, right? The blonde ghost, as he was known. And these are the type of people that were showing up in his artwork on the wall. And that's why the CIA called up the Whitney Gallery and said, hey, we want to check it out here. And I'm sure the guys in the the men in black went out there to check it out and said, man, our man Bush might lose the election. This guy here is Michele Sindona, and you might know him from the Banco di Ambrosiano. This is the Vatican Bank. There's a whole literature on that, the whole black financing of the New World Order, and you know about Gladio, and but he's the banker behind bars here, the happy banker, and these are the type of the people that Lombardi was graphing on in his artwork. And by the way, some of that artwork is going up today, like $150,000. So he might be amused by that. This is Ted Hand and Paul Nugent, the Nugan Bank. This is one of the black banking operations, Nugan Hand, just like the Banco di Ambrosiano, and all the offshore banks that we now know about Panama, thanks to the Panama Papers. This is how this is the real economy, ladies. The one that you and I are dealing with, that's the ceremonial economy. So these are the people that showed up in his graphs. This is Mark Rich, right? I think he died in a mysterious fire in Switzerland, but he was in prison for a while. And I believe it was Bill Clinton who sprang him right before Clinton went out of office. You have these presidential pardon powers. So he pardoned Mark Rich, and Denise Rich, I think, I can assume, slipped the Clinton Foundation or whoever it was as a pass-through, slipped them some money to make sure that Mark Rich got free. And so you can see that Lombardi was a troublemaker. Do you recognize this family? I'm not going to even say their name because I'm going to let you have all the fun. But look who's in the middle of it. Yeah, Barbara. And she's a Walker, Walker. That's the real. They know this photo tells you this. It's always the woman. It's the female bloodline that stands at the center of power, right? The guys, and that's sadly saying you might be a Trump fan, but it was really Melania Trump who was the power there, and she's still the power. And so you know the rest. And he shortly, died, as I mentioned, after he was cast out. Let's see what we have here.
Hi, I'm Sam.
Okay, this is Sander Hicks as of 3 years ago. He's the publisher, or was the publisher, of Soft Skull Press. He's the guy that came forward and said, listen, Hatfield, your story's so important. I'm going to invest my funds, my limited money, and we're going to just start up a publisher, call it Soft Skull, and we're going to release it. And it got, of course, it's not going to be reviewed in the Washington Post or any of the so-called legitimate news, but it was an underground sensation. It hit all the independent bookstores, and you can still find it on DARPA.com, otherwise known as Bezos.com, otherwise known as Amazon. So pick yourself up a copy. But here's Sander Hicks. And when he did this, by the way, he was a humble janitor. Okay. So when I talk about, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or Dr. Mercola, you don't have to have a law degree or a Ph.D., whatever. I mean, he stepped up and said, we're going to get the truth. Everybody can participate in defending the Republic, the American Republic, including Sander Hicks. And this is not an endorsement for his political career. I really don't know who he is. I just respect him for publishing Hatfield and going through just and that documentary, Halos and Horns, really goes into it. So find that one as well. You can't find it on YouTube. You're going to have to buy it somewhere. It's not on Netflix. You're going to have to find it like I did on DARPA.com, otherwise known as Amazon.com.
Hi, I'm Sander Hicks. I'm a candidate for U.S. Congress in the 12th Congressional District. I am New York City's best-known 9/11 truth author. I've written 2 books of well-researched nonfiction that tell the truth about the Bush-Cheney 9/11 cover-up. I am courageous, I'm fearless, I'm an advocate for peace, I'm an advocate for total government transparency about this taboo topic. A lot of people tell me, you can't talk about 9/11, and that's coming from fear. I'm saying we as a country need to move beyond fear and into a courageous embrace of peace and nonviolence. We're in the middle of huge historical changes. Now we have lawyers filing a grand jury petition. We have over 3,000 architects and engineers in town this weekend. And of course, we've got the Truth Action Project, which is the grassroots movement doing petitioning for a new investigation of 9/11. So make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel, sign up for email at hicksforcongress.com, and remember to vote June 2018 in the primary. Thank you. Best known 9/11 truth.
Sorry, I'm back. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if he won the election. I don't think he did. Otherwise, I would have heard about it, and would have struck, really a bell in my head. Oh, Senator Hicks won a congressional seat. So I don't think he won, but he's still active. And again, just like Amy Goodman, who comes from the left, Senator Hicks is a liberal Democrat. He's a part of the Democratic Party. I think he might have run as an independent, but he identifies as a progressive Democrat. And I mention this because a lot of the people who are watching Alex Jones, they seem to thrive on making fun of liberals and libtards and labeling people, they're Chinacons, they're liberals, they're incels or whatever else. And that ruined us in the case. It really backfired in the case of the Trump re-election by all this type of polarization. So maybe that's his real function: call people a bunch of race baiters, when being someone who is has hundreds of thousands of people watching him, responsible for dividing the American public and the world public. According to him, he has a lot of Asian listeners. If I was an Asian listener, I'd be totally turned off to his anti-Chinese and anti-Asian racist rhetoric. You can watch me instead, and I'll treat you well. Anyway, Senator Hicks, rather. This brings us full circle. These are two individuals, Mark Lombardi and the historian Hatfield, James Hatfield, that you can check out. And the reason why I'm showing it now, ladies and gentlemen, is because just as Senator Hicks was alluding to where it concerns the 9/11 investigation, we are seeing an efflorescence of medical people, physicians, right? Researchers, laboratory researchers, nurses, EMT personnel, attorneys, and such as Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I think he's an attorney by training and by profession, and any number of people who are at last coming forward to throw back this most recent assault on humanity. The only group of professionals that lack the fortitude to come forward seem to be in the professoriate, and that's why I'm going in on you with my podcast, True Crime at the University. Ladies and gentlemen, that's my time. I'll see you in an hour in my favorite show of the week. It's called the Thursday Trio. Thank you very much, Bob Kenter, Infidel Apostate, Tyrone Sargent. Glad to see you here. And David Underdown, the blonde ghost. That's it, Ted Shackley. Check out Mark Lombardi. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention. And please share this because it's on a different channel, and I want people to watch this and subscribe. All right, thank you again. Bye.